this is a pure legislation play. I can understand the frustrations of investors right now, but if people are at a stage right now where they're thinking this industry is the biggest fraud, what would you say to them? Hey everyone, welcome to our Trade to Black podcast. Thanks for checking in. I'm your host, Shad Dales. Let's talk cannabis. And yes, stock's down quite a bit, but we want to know if we hit the all-time lows. We're listening to you viewers out there. You want less politics, more cannabis talk. So we'll dive into that right now, and we'll find out where exactly is the industry going. And as usual, we bring in our two co-hosts, Anthony Verrill, millennial entrepreneur. Good to see you.
How's it going? It's Masters Week. Pumped.
Masters.
Another green in my life that I love.
The unofficial dawning of spring. We have hope. The NCAA March Madness tournament ends, which was pretty much the Snorefest, the championship game, and the Masters begins. And Jim Nance.
Are you watching the Frozen Four at all?
I haven't. I've read. It's pretty entertaining, is it not?
There was a good game last night or 2 nights ago that I watched the highlights where Minnesota waxed Boston College.
I've actually had a lot of feedback. The women's Final Four in basketball was absolutely entertaining. And what's the girl's name from Iowa? Caitlin Martin, is it?
Caitlin Clark. It was Caitlin Clark from Iowa and then Angel Reese from LSU.
What was that?
We like to turn everything in this country into a fucking race issue. So, of course, it was you're going to do this in a game, and you're going to do this in a game. Like, she just balled out and won the fucking national championship. Let the girl do whatever she wants.
Yeah.
Like, basketball players trash talk.
Yeah.
Basketball players throw gestures at each other. Steph's on the court going like this and doing whatever. I mean, she's the best in her game. She just won the national title.
Yep.
Let the girl be. She happens to be outspoken. That's who she is. There ain't nothing wrong with what she did. I mean, Dave Portnoy was an idiot for calling it absolutely classless.
Yeah. Ben, good to see you. How was your week?
Week was good, fellas. Short week. The markets are moving as always. Cannabis stocks, another low, so we'll get into that in a second. But otherwise, a pretty good week.
Okay, so let's begin with that. We have some people on here that basically say it's the biggest fraud. You know, stocks down 85, 90%. What's your response to that, Anthony, like where we're at right now? Because it's just, this is a pure legislation play. I can understand the frustrations of investors right now. But if people are at a stage right now where they're thinking this industry is the biggest fraud, what would you say to them?
I think that they're right. I also think that there needs to be a bifurcation in what they're saying. We're talking about stocks being down 90-something%. The stocks that are down 90-something% that are the tier 1 MSOs and companies with a lot of merit absolutely are not frauds. They're sound businesses built by people with reputations, funded by institutions. They are not fraudulent. Yep. Have I seen fraudulent actors in this space? Yeah, I've seen companies that claim to have operations in Israel that have nothing more than a piece of paper. They raised tens of millions of dollars, and I don't think they've broke ground to this day. I've seen product companies that have absolutely nothing. I've seen tech companies that just have a pitch deck. There is fraud in everything. There's fraud in cannabis. There's fraud in psychedelics. There's fraud in crypto. Hell, there's fraud in tech. Let's just look at Nikola, Theranos. There's fraud everywhere. But is the cannabis industry inherently fraud, and is there fraud at the top, and is there fraud in the companies that are driving this sector? Absolutely not. But like I said in pre-production, they're not wrong by making that statement. It just needs to be said where the fraud is and not have it just be a blanket statement.
Ben, do you echo that sentiment?
Mostly, I don't think the industry itself is a fraud, but everything that Anthony said is true. You have fraudulent actors in every sector, like all the ones Anthony mentioned. Even the big banks, J.P. Morgan pays billions of dollars periodically for fraud in the futures markets or whatever. So there's fraud everywhere. The stocks are reflecting mostly the lack of federal reform. So on aggregate, there are retail locations, there are cultivation centers, there are everything associated with that. There are billion-dollar sales for some of these companies. So the industry itself is not a fraud. It just, the price action looks that way because of the lack of federal reform. And of course, you have sporadic bad actors and bad management in some of these smaller companies. So yes, mostly agree.
Well, I was actually reading when you say bad actors, Michigan House Speaker, forget what his name was, but he's being charged right now basically in a bribery for cannabis licenses. But this is kind of what we were talking about last week with Matt Hawkins, where this rollout has been absolutely brutal as far as who's been getting licenses and who hasn't. But that's probably one of the main reasons why a lot of investors have turned away. It's become more and more draining for them just to see where this industry is going to go and mature. But saying that, as you guys have said, these stocks are down 90%. But if there are companies right now that are generating revenue and we look at a turning point, what that is, I have no idea from a legislation standpoint. These prices right now are incredible to enter in. Would you agree with that, Ben?
I do. I think inherently the problem with that is that some of the way that the lack of growth is in the sector and some of the capital ratios that are happening right now, it makes it very hard to invest because some loan covenants might be broken if certain factors on the financial side trigger, for example. So that could create negative consequences like a downgrade of a credit rating, higher interest payments on some of the notes and things like that. So it's a very tricky environment. What I'm trying to convey is that you can't just look at it and say, okay, Air Wellness is down 92% from the high, it must be a buy. Columbia Care is down 94% from the low, it must be a buy. You have to be careful not to fall into that trap, like the value trap, as they call it, because there are certain things that could happen that could have further negative consequences, like a snowball rolling down the hill, if some of their loan covenants are not kept up to speed. And I don't know if that's going to be a problem in the sector, but it potentially could be. So you got to be careful and watch out and use technicals. Price action will usually tell you, when's a good time to buy.
Good approach, good education. Anthony, you've said you'll wait and sit for the 20% run up. Is there a term or a process or stuff that you do each and every time when you look at stuff, like some of the valuations or some of the research that you do to be better prepared?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ben kind of nailed it. It's not going to be a rising tide lifts all boats. I mean, there are bombs right now in the tier 1 MSOs that could easily wreck a business. I mean, I think that companies saddled with massive debt, companies that have that haven't been able to reach profitability, that have distressed assets, just because it's a tier 1 MSO, it's gotten beat to shit, and you think it's a good value because of what the criteria was a year or two ago. That doesn't really correlate here. Like I said, I'm sitting on my hands. I have not bought a single cannabis stock in probably the last 9 months. I'm actually buying some psychedelic stocks right now.
I know.
And starting to toe back in. But I've got the names that I'm going to buy, and I've got the guns, the bullets that I'm going to decide to deploy, and that's pretty much, I'm sticking to it. I'm sticking with what I think are probably the top 3 MSOs in the space that have exposure in the States, that also have some exposure to the EU, that are sound businesses that I trust the operators, and they're cashed up, they're not debt-ridden, and they've got decent-looking balance sheets that will greatly improve once we get some sort of reform on the regulatory front.
We've had some interesting conversations last couple of weeks pertaining to like Christian Agermeyer and some pretty, strong voices within the psychedelic space. You just said that you're buying psychedelic stocks right now. Why?
I just think it looks good from a valuation perspective. I mean, it looks good from the also the standpoint of the conversation starting to change. I just think that there's very few players to choose in the space from a public market standpoint, and the ones that are there right now, Numinous, Atai, Compass, I'm willing to bet moving forward that if psychedelics do get traction and if psychedelics do change the paradigm that we think they're going to do, there aren't really any other companies that are going to compete with the ones that I just named and a couple more. It's either going to boom and they're going to be the beneficiaries of this movement, or it's going to fizzle out and no one's ever going anywhere. I see it as being pretty binary.
Yeah. Ben, I actually had a conversation earlier this week that one of the main reasons why a lot of these clinics are in the negative and are not turning profit, meaning these ketamine clinics, is because there's no attachment to psychedelic-assisted therapy that's currently going on right now. Do you believe that?
Yeah, I do believe that to a large degree, because when psychedelic assisted therapy does become a thing, I'm assuming it will. That's going to bring in a lot higher margin sort of therapy sessions. These will be going for 10,000 to 15,000. That's what we're hearing, and that's going to be a lot more profit baked in than you do from some of the ketamine clinics that don't have the encompassing psychotherapy to go along with it. I think they're mainly just or mostly injections through IV and stuff like that to help you feel better, to alleviate some of the symptoms of depression, but not the full scale therapeutics that go along with it. So once MDMA assisted therapy is approved and psilocybin, I think there'll be a wider array of products that these clinics can to administer to patients, and that will also broaden their patient patient load or amount of patients that they can bring in. So yes, I do agree with that.
All right, Ben. So Anthony has talked about how he's buying psychedelic stocks, and you've reiterated in the past that these companies need to get phase 2B data in order for Big Pharma to come in and start sponsoring. So do you think now, do you agree with him? Is now the time to be buying these stocks?
Well, there's two trains of thought. I'm personally not buying these stocks right now en masse, just because I put a lot of faith in the technicals. I'm a believer that most of positive news and stuff is reflected in the price action most of the time, and the price action is not showing this to be that favorable time. However, there are some investors out there who look at the fundamentals, who look at so the present value not being aligned with the future value of the companies that make it. And I can totally see why people are investing in the Atais and the Numinuses right now. I do get it, because there's so much potential involved here. So I personally am not, just because I'm a technical trader and I put a lot of focus into that.
Interesting times, to say the least. One thing's for sure, there's a lot of momentum that's starting to build behind the scenes regarding the industry based on the conversations that we're having. So one of the things I actually want to touch on, too, is MAPS. They released positive preliminary results from an observational follow-up study. The study itself was assessing the long-term safety and efficacy of MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD. The findings actually provide additional hope the therapy could be a primary frontline treatment for people with PTSD. So, Ben, I know that you were watching this. What's the significance of this? And just, further elaborates that this is real, right?
Yeah, no, it's definitely real. MAPS conducted a MAP 1 and MAP 2 phase 3 studies on MDMA for assisted therapy for PTSD, and they're both produced gangbuster results. What we saw here was a follow-on observational study of the durability of those results, and again, it looks really good. It looks like the therapy is durable and it is lasting and maintaining. So I think the biggest takeaway here for investors is that it's another peg, it's another anecdote that they can use to present the information to the FDA and Health Canada and say, look, this therapy should be approved. And because the observations are good for a longer time period, I think it's more likely that the regulators will approve this therapy going forward. So that's a very good thing. Hopefully by the end of this year, like we're hearing, or at earliest, Q1 or Q2 of next year.
What does that look like if you guys had to look next Q1, Q2? FDA approves. What does this industry look like overnight? Because we've talked to Dr. Ben Sessa with the amount of psychedelic-assisted therapy therapists that are going to be needed. Cody Chandra was talking to us, Anthony, as much as 16,000 clinics are going to be needed across the country. There is a lot of work that needs to be done once they approve this, and the infrastructure, it's overwhelming. Do you not think?
Oh, yeah, it's going to take some time. I mean, it's going to... But I mean, look, you look at Numinus, and I know that they have the certification arm for the practitioners. I mean, there's going to be companies that have these assets that can scale out. But I mean, yeah, it's going to take a lot of physician education. It's going to take a lot of consumer education, and it's going to take a lot of infrastructure that's pre-existing, and that's also going to need to be built from the ground up to service these needs. This is going to be a very large, sweeping movement if and when it takes shape. I mean, mental health is you could obviously argue that it's a crisis. And I mean, when you look at the way that it's being dealt with now versus the way that the psychedelic industry can innovate it too, it's not going to be overnight. But there are measures being taken right now, proactively, to get ready for it.
Like, a lot of doctors will embrace this if the data is there, correct? So it's like, and I mean doctors that are in traditional medicine right now. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I mean,
it's an interesting point because Christian brought that up actually earlier this week, where he was saying Johnson & Johnson and their sales team basically are having a hard time selling Spravato because they don't really understand it. And does the same thing apply? If the data is there, do a lot of these traditional, doctors, GPs start to embrace it, or will they be reluctant to prescribe it? I know it's a tough question.
No, I think I can weigh in there if you want. I think there'll be a lot of current practitioners that will resist it, like any sort of new innovation or technology that comes on the market, just because they don't know it. And this is a very highly specialized sort of domain, right? So if you take like a traditional psychiatrist who prescribes current SSRIs for high risk patients or whatever, they don't know necessarily how to administer this sort of therapy, right? So it's going to be a transition. They're going to have to learn, and some will probably opt out just because they don't know it. And then, some will will embrace the innovation and opt in and obtain the proper therapy in order to be licensed to do this kind of thing. So I think you'll see a mixture of both, personally.
Do you guys have?
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
What I'm actually more interested to see now that I'm thinking about it is doctors that, once the data is there and once the efficacy has been proven and some of the stuff is approved, doctors that are going to come out against it, as it's not an alternative to SSRIs and benzos, et cetera. Because I bet you there are going to be those kind of doctors, and those are doctors that I'd be like, all right, well, now you definitely don't have your patient's best interest in hand, because the prescription medication that you are prescribing is toxic, and it is cognitively deteriorating your patients.
Yeah.
Versus something like a psychedelic therapy.
Against it.
Yeah.
There's going to be. Look at how many doctors. Look at how many doctors are against cannabis.
Big difference, though.
Granted, there's much less. It's a big difference. There's much less data, but I mean, there are doctors that are against. There are doctors that are like, for instance, there are doctors that think naturopaths are completely nuts. There are doctors that are against plenty of things where there's data that shows the counterpoint to something that they believe in. There's going to be doctors that are bought into that are bought by big pharma that are going to say SSRIs are much better than psychedelics.
Which begs the question: does big pharma start coming in? Because there's so many.
They have to. They're going to be defensive.
I know, but
they have to.
There's so many moving pieces in this. It's like, do insurance companies continue to provide coverage towards a drug that may not work? A lot of people have said it doesn't work for something that does, but. One thing's for sure, this healthcare landscape on how to treat mental health is going to get turned upside down over these next coming years. That's for sure. I'd be curious.
Go
ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, it's mostly because we don't really still understand how the brain works.
Well said.
Like that's really what it boils down to. Like, at the end of the day, we have a very, very elementary understanding of how the brain actually works. This shit's all trial and error.
Well, some of the people we were speaking to at UBC a while back, the people you introduced us to, Anthony, some of the trials they're doing right now related to Alzheimer's. Like, when my dad passed away last month of dementia, I found out that 99.6% of all research drugs fail pertaining to that disease. 99.6%. And now some of the stuff that's being done at UBC is actually seeing regression in Alzheimer's, which a lot of people in their medical fields have never, ever seen before. Like, it's crazy the amount of research, which is badly needed because there's been no advancements. But I'd be curious, and this is a question for both of you. Do you have conversations with everyday people about the industry? And is there a lot of misconception based on some of the conversations that you have from people that you speak to pertaining to it?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a lot of friends now that just microdose psilocybin. They think it's the best thing ever. They're like, we microdose
Okay.
psilocybin, or we take like these mushroom chocolates. It makes them like giggly. It ups their mood. I mean, everybody that I know right now, like 90% of my friends are somehow consuming psilocybin in microdoses or in
Wow.
chocolates.
Really?
And it's like it's just as prevalent as people smoking cannabis.
Really?
And I mean, people are doing it as like, oh yeah, and they're doing it in like a social setting as like an alternative to drinking, or other substances. So I mean, it's there. I mean, I think there's a lot of misconceptions around well, let me put it to you this way: those same consumers are not knowledgeable enough to understand the actual biotech and the drug development and the actual meat that's on the bone for where psilocybin and LSD and MDMA are going. They still all think that it's like the recreational substances that have their time and place. So I mean, misconceptions, yeah. I mean, people don't understand the viability of this stuff really moving forward.
Yeah, they will in due time, though. Ben, how about you? Do you have
yeah.
conversations?
Yeah, the conversations I have is that people are very positive about the sector. They love the data, and they think it's moving forward. You know, microdosing is a different issue. I've seen some of the studies. I've read some of the PubMed research and the various published papers, and I think from what I can tell, the data is very inconclusive in terms of does microdosing work of psilocybin in particular. I think people get some sort of cognition effects, and people definitely feel it, but does it actually help depression? Does it actually help some of the symptoms? I think the data is pretty inconclusive, and you can see why, because psychedelics, as Rick Doblin says, for example, it's really the psychedelic therapy which is the big driver
Yeah.
of these change.
Yeah.
And it's the psychedelic medicine, getting in that state, getting into the growing neural pathways and all this kind of thing, that is really the facilitator for that therapy to work.
Yeah.
And when you microdose, you're just not taking a dose enough to
Correct.
perhaps experience that big neural rewiring. You're getting just enough to feel like something different and you feel good or giggly, but you may not be getting at that level. So
is that why
we'll see how the research plays out.
Is that why these ketamine clinics aren't turning profit? It's like one and done for a lot of these people that are going?
No. I mean, I've like, for instance, like Catherine Walker and like Revitalist, like I've talked to her about her patients, and I mean, she has military personnel,
Yeah.
she has policemen, she has doctors that have suffered like trauma in like the ICU, and these guys come in for like 4 to 6 month maintenance doses for the ketamine infusions. So it's not one and done. It's a recurring thing.
So
But are they taking psychotherapy with that, though, Anthony? I don't think they are for the most part, are they?
No, they aren't. For the most part, no. They're ketamine. They're ketamine infusions.
Okay, and this goes back to why the MDMA assisted therapy is so important for the sector. It's because these are higher valued products, because you get the psychotherapy along with that, and these treatments are going to go for a lot more money than the current ketamine infusion treatments are.
interesting. Good conversation, gents. Last thing I want to touch on, European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde was actually interviewed and said the digital euro, which will be decided on by October, this is significant because it indicates that a major central bank and a major economic bloc is definitely trying to transition to a central bank digital currency. This is interesting, and to say the least. What'd you make of this, Anthony?
What did I make of this? How to unpack this? I mean, I think she's like a vile human being. She reminds me of the chick from the Hunger Games. I mean, if you want to be real, we could. If this was like if this was like back in the day, we probably would have already taken all these central bankers out to the town square and tarred and feathered them.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all completely corrupt. They all are completely out of touch with reality. I mean, they only care about control and centralized control at that. My fear is, and this is what I was kind of thinking yesterday, is people that aren't really in tune with the crypto industry aren't really getting what's going on with CBDCs and with digital currencies and what the effects can be. I think this stuff is going to get pretty hairy. It's kind of weird that at the same time, the U.S. has a quote-unquote banking crisis, all the geopolitical stuff that's going on. Now you've got a basically concerted effort against the dollar. And now you've got accelerated conversations around CBDCs being launched. I think that her reasoning to defend off dependency on other foreign currencies, you can do that with a traditional fiat just as well as you can with a digital currency. I mean, the only thing that I'm thinking of is, you know how you can really stop a bank run in real time? You have a centralized digital currency and you hit a button that says nobody can spend or withdraw anything. It all needs to stay put. You will have absolute complete control over society with a CBDC. That's not being crazy. That's not being conspiracy theorist. That is the truth.
Yep.
They can shut you off and do whatever they please. If they don't want you to shop somewhere, or you say something online against somebody and they want to devalue your spending power, that's what they will have the power to do.
Yeah.
You won't have to file taxes anymore because all of your transactions and your entire well-being from a monetary perspective will be digital and tracked.
Yep.
So there ain't no there's no gray area anymore.
Well, one thing's fair. It's the changing of the guard. We continue to talk about this every single week. Like, even look at the U.S. Treasury said actually decentralized crypto markets threaten national security. To me, it's just another example as the old guard is losing grip on control and they don't know how to handle this. What do you think, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I looked at that headline. I'm like, there's no doubt there's a concerted attack by federal regulators to damage the reputation of crypto, to make it to make people use it less. I mean, there's no doubt about it. From everything from the exchanges to going after Bitcoin to calling crypto illegal assets or whatever. I mean, there's no doubt about it, and I think this all plays into the CBDC situation that we saw with Lagarde, right? I mean, obviously they want to implement this because it's a mechanism for that control system where they can, the central banks want to look at your money as their assets, right?
Yeah.
So it's a whole different flip on the way we've traditionally seen money, which is you be productive in society, you make whatever you make, and then accrue a value in your bank account. You have assets; they're your money. You get to spend it as you see fit. The paradigm's changing, where now the your money is supposed to be their assets, and then they can control where you can spend it. And again, it's going to be paired to the social credit system, where if you buy too much meat or if you travel, go on too many vacations, and you'll get fined for how much carbon you're using. I mean, this is where it's all headed.
You believe that? You believe that?
The digital dollar, absolutely, 100%. This is where they all want to go.
I mean,
now, will it get there ultimately? I'm not necessarily sure. Depends how much pushback we have from the population, right? But as it stands right now, and there's a lot of people aren't creating too much of a backlash from it, then it could go in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, I really do think that these CBDCs are going to be the breaking point to where people revolt against the powers that be in government. It's kind of going to be the straw that broke the camel's back. I mean,
really?
Look what's going on in France right now. That's the difference between the Europeans and Americans. The Europeans, if something's wrong or they don't believe in something, they actually go out there and protest and make their point known. Like, the stuff that's going on in France, that the people are waking up and understanding that their pension funds and their retirement accounts, their fugazi, that money's actually not going to be there when they need it. That started in America 10 years ago. Like, the FICA that gets taken out of my paycheck and the Social Security that I contribute to, if you do the math, and it's very simple math, the money that I'm giving and contributing right now is not going to be there when I, quote unquote, I'm supposed to get it and need it. Like, I'm literally being robbed.
Now, I was just going to bring this up, Anthony. I was just going to bring up France, because if you notice what happened, or our viewers notice what happened, right? The media has been portraying it. They haven't been covering the protests like they should, the mainstream media.
Yeah.
But when they do, they always portray it as being, the French people are crazy because their retirement age is going up 2 years, so they're doing this. They still have a lower retirement age than other European countries. Look at them. But really what it's about is the digital currency plays a part of that, right? The French are limited. They can't withdraw more than 1,000 euros from their bank. And if you look at some of the protests, look what happened in Paris. Some of the protesters went to BlackRock.
They did go to BlackRock,
which has the ultimate private-public partnership with government that's implementing this stuff. They went in their lobby, lit flares, There's hundreds of people there, banners. So people are not just upset about the retirement limit. They're upset about all the shit that's going along and all the edicts that in the central bank digital currency that's coming down the pike.
Yeah.
They're being restricted, and this is the backlash.
Will change happen?
I don't think,
even with protesting.
I don't. I mean, from where I'm sitting, like, governments are incrementally getting and trying to get more and more control over the people. That historically, like we were talking about empires on the last episode, that usually doesn't end well for the governments.
No.
Like, people do fight back eventually.
And do you think it has a lot to do with the old guard, old regime? Like, they just don't know how to let go?
That and the system, like, the system's completely fucked.
It's
Like, all like the global monetary system and the way that everything has really been constructed, let's just say post World War II, like, it doesn't really work. It's kind of meant to benefit a few, and then everybody else kind of files into, like, serfdom. And that just is getting, like, exacerbated and amplified, and people now can't earn a living. Like, that's what it boils down to. Like,
one of the problems that the government has, though, or one of the advantages they have, is that they allow things to burn out, right? So as we saw with the yellow vest situation in France, whether you agree or don't agree, that's besides the point. They allowed these protests went on for months and months, and they were big, they were widespread, and eventually, things got damaged and whatever. But eventually they petered out, and then the same status quo, the same system prevailed, right? So I think that's sort of their plan, is they let things boil and things get broken or whatever, but then eventually people give up almost. They have to go back to their lives. They can't keep protesting month in, month out, and nothing ever changes. So I think that is the biggest factor of maybe change won't happen, just people run out of steam.
Yeah, it's like a kid having a tantrum. You just let them fucking sit there and scream, and they'll scream themselves out, and then they'll eventually either A, fall asleep, or B, fall in line. I mean, it's literally textbook. It's very elementary ways of solving problems.
interesting take from both of you, but I thought this was rather insightful. But appreciate the feedback. Enjoy the rest of your Easter weekend. I'm going to be in Miami next week for the big Benzenga conference. So midweek this week, we're actually going to break down a story that you did, Ben, last week pertaining to 9 MSOs and the upcoming debt cliffs. But we're going to basically break down the top 5 MSOs and what investors can anticipate potentially in the coming months pertaining to that in a podcast that we're going to have upcoming this week, and some of the dialogue that we get from people that we spoke to at the Benzenga conference this week. So, gents, appreciate the time. Let's keep in touch and enjoy the rest of your weekend and your families for Easter. Happy Easter.
Thanks. Talk soon.
Thanks, guys.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching, and if you want to learn more about the emerging industries that we cover, then leave a comment below and let us know who you want us to interview, the questions you want asked, and the information that you want to learn. We want to hear from you. As usual, click on that bell for all notifications to get the latest information, share this video with your network, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel because we would not be here without you. Thanks for watching, everyone.